Continental Airlines Flight 11. It was May 22, 1962, when Continental Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 707-124 bound from Chicago to Kansas City, became the first U.S. jetliner destroyed by an in-flight bombing. The aircraft, registered N70775, lifted off from O'Hare Airport at 8:35 p.m., with 45 people on board, including 37 passengers and 8 crew members. About 40 minutes later, radar screens flickered, and then went blank. The jet had vanished somewhere over the dark skies of Centerville, Iowa. The aircraft was trying to dodge thunderstorms when, at 9:17 p.m., an explosion ripped through the right rear lavatory. The blast sheared off the tail section, causing violent decompression and sending the jet into a fatal dive. Witnesses on the ground heard a thunderous boom, and a B-47 bomber crew flying nearby saw a sudden flash in the clouds. The 707 disintegrated midair and plummeted into a Missouri clover field, scattering wreckage across 6 miles. One passenger initially survived, but later succumbed to internal injuries, bringing the death toll to 45. Investigators soon found the culprit. Thomas G. Doty, a 34-year-old passenger facing criminal charges, had smuggled 6 sticks of dynamite on board in his briefcase. He had purchased $300,000 worth of life insurance, equivalent to about $1.19 million today, hoping his wife and daughter would collect after his death. The explosion was an act of insurance fraud and suicide, marking one of the most shocking crimes in American aviation. The tragedy forced sweeping changes in airport screening and onboard security measures years before metal detectors became standard. A memorial now stands in Unionville, Missouri, honoring the victims of a night when greed and desperation turned the sky into fire. Continental Airlines Flight 12. Continental Airlines Flight 12 was supposed to be a routine overnight flight from Los Angeles to Chicago, stopping briefly in Kansas City. But on July 1, 1965, a combination of heavy rain, low visibility, and a dangerously short runway turned that stopover into a turning point for aviation safety. The Boeing 707-124, registered N70773, touched down at 5:29 a.m. on Kansas City's 7,000-foot runway, about 1,050 feet from its start. What followed was a terrifying fight against physics. The pilots deployed every tool: spoilers, reverse thrust, and full brakes. But the jet refused to slow down. Water pooled on the surface caused hydroplaning, stripping away the tire's grip on the runway. Realizing they were running out of asphalt, Captain Lee R. Zerba tried to swerve left, using power from the right engines to steer. The plane slid off the runway at about 40 knots, breaking apart into 3 pieces after hitting an earthen embankment. Miraculously, all 66 people on board survived, though 5 sustained minor injuries. The $5 million jet was destroyed, the 14th Boeing 707 hull loss in history. The Civil Aeronautics Board concluded the crash was caused by hydroplaning, worsened by Kansas City's short, ungrooved runways. The event sparked national outrage and a wave of reforms. The Federal Aviation Administration began experimenting with runway grooving, a technique that channels away water and improves braking. Within a few years, grooved runways appeared at Atlanta, Chicago Midway, JFK, and Washington National Airport. But the most significant legacy came later. The construction of Kansas City International Airport opened in 1972 with runways over 9,000 feet long, a direct result of the Flight 12 accident. A near tragedy that ended without deaths ended up rewriting how America lands its planes in the rain. Continental Airlines Flight 1404. On December 20th, 2008, Continental Airlines Flight 1404, a Boeing 737-524, lined up for takeoff from Denver International Airport bound for Houston. It was a calm evening until the moment the aircraft accelerated down runway 34R, where something went catastrophically wrong. Within seconds, the plane veered sharply left, skidded off the runway, and plunged into a 40-foot deep ravine before bursting into flames. Out of 115 people on board, every single one survived, a miracle in what would become Denver Airport's most serious accident in history. The aircraft tore apart as it hit the ground. The fuselage cracked, the right engine ripped away, and the main landing gear sheared off. Fire consumed much of the right side as passengers scrambled through smoke and debris to escape from the left. Among them was Richard Lowe, an off-duty pilot who re-entered the burning cabin several times to pull survivors out, an act that earned him the Airman's Medal. Investigators later discovered that the pilots had unknowingly taken off into a powerful crosswind gusting up to 45 knots, 52 miles per hour, far stronger than what the control tower reported. The captain, David Butler, critically injured in the crash, had tried to keep the aircraft centered, but 4 seconds before the excursion, His right rudder input stopped responding. The NTSB concluded that a combination of severe gusts and inadequate industry training for extreme crosswinds caused the accident. The result was a complete hull loss worth over $20 million, but not a single life was lost. The tragedy led the FAA to mandate new crosswind training standards and require air traffic controllers to share real-time gust data instead of averages, a change that reshaped pilot safety protocols across U.S. aviation. Continental Airlines Flight 1713. On November 15, 1987, Continental Airlines Flight 1713, a DC-9-14 with registration N626TX, attempted takeoff from Denver's Stapleton Airport amid a blizzard and heavy snow. The aircraft of 21 years age, with over 52,400 flight hours and 61,800 cycles, carried 82 occupants, 77 passengers, and 5 crew. During the rotation phase, the first officer over-rotated while ice had already built up on the wings, causing the left wing to stall and strike the runway, triggering a violent crash sequence that resulted in 28 fatalities, 53 injured, and 54 survivors. Investigators found the captain failed to have the aircraft de-iced a second time after a delay, while the first officer, with only 36 hours on this jet type, executed a takeoff rotation at more than double the recommended rate. The time span between de-icing completion and takeoff was 27 minutes, exceeding safe limits, and the snow-laden surfaces impaired lift dramatically. Errors compounded. Air traffic control confusion during taxi, delay in departure, cockpit crew both newly qualified on type, and a runway environment ravaged by snow and ice. The official work concluded the probable cause was the captain's failure to repeat de-icing and the first officer's excessive rotation rate, with contributing factors that included inadequate oversight of newly qualified crew and poor coordination with air traffic control. The tragedy prompted Continental to overhaul its de-icing policy and crew qualification practices, ensuring inexperienced pilots would not serve together on the same flight. Beyond the numbers, the accident underscored how seemingly minor choices, when layered with weather, worn training, and operational pressure, can cascade into catastrophe. Flight 1713 still serves as a touchstone for how human error, environmental hazards, and procedural lapse converge at high speed. Continental Airlines Flight 1883. On October 28, 2006, passengers aboard Continental Airlines Flight 1883 from Orlando to Newark had no idea they were minutes away from what could have been one of the most shocking aviation mistakes in modern U.S. history. The Boeing 757-224, carrying 148 passengers and 6 crew, approached Newark Liberty International Airport at dusk. The first officer, landing at Newark for the first time, lined up for what he believed was runway 29, but instead, the massive jet touched down on taxiway Z, a strip only 75 feet wide, barely half the width of a real runway. The aircraft, with a wingspan of 124 feet, left almost no margin for error. The landing speed was 130 knots, 150 miles per hour, and somehow the 757 rolled to a stop without injuries or damage. A simple but deadly mistake had been avoided by inches. The NTSB later confirmed that both pilots had mistaken the brighter taxiway lights for the runway lights, an illusion worsened by night conditions and similar lighting intensities between the two. Runway 29, the one they were supposed to land on, sat just a few hundred feet away, completely untouched. Investigators found the cockpit was calm throughout the approach. Neither pilot realized anything was wrong until the aircraft stopped. The FAA later admitted the lighting configuration made the taxiway appear more prominent from the air, especially during low light hours. Following the incident, Newark changed its lighting intensity differentials, and the FAA rewrote approach procedures to prevent such confusion. Both pilots were grounded, retrained, and eventually reinstated, but the event remains a chilling example of how a small misjudgment, even in clear weather, could have turned 154 lives and a $90 million aircraft into a disaster headline. It's remembered today as one of aviation's most unbelievable near misses. Continental Express Flight 2574. On September 11, 1991, Continental Express Flight 2574 took off from Laredo, Texas, bound for Houston, carrying 14 people, 11 passengers, and 3 crew members. Less than an hour later, the Embraer EMB 120 RT Brasilia, cruising smoothly at 24,000 feet, began its descent toward Houston. Then, without warning, the aircraft suddenly pitched nose down and tore apart midair over Eagle Lake, Texas, about 65 miles from its destination. Witnesses on the ground saw a flash of fire as the wreckage scattered across a 4-square-mile area. No one survived. Initial theories ranged from a bomb to turbulence, but what investigators found was far more disturbing. A maintenance failure so simple it bordered on absurd. The night before the crash, a crew had removed 47 screws from the aircraft's horizontal stabilizer during de-icing boot maintenance. When their shift ended, the next team never replaced them. The result? At 260 knots, 300 miles per hour, the unsecured stabilizer ripped away, and the plane disintegrated in seconds under a force of 3.4 Gs. The aircraft had already been in and out of maintenance 33 times for unscheduled repairs, yet no one caught the missing screws. The NTSB called out Continental Express for failing to enforce proper procedures and criticized the FAA for poor oversight. In the wreckage, investigators even found $500,000 worth of diamonds, later valued at $1.2 million in today's money, tragic relics from a flight doomed by human negligence. The crash became a defining moment for aviation safety culture in the 1990s, pushing airlines to rethink maintenance accountability and shift change communication. It was a brutal lesson that one missing screw in the wrong place could bring down an entire plane. Continental Airlines Flight 603. On the morning of March 1, 1978, Continental Airlines Flight 603, a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, was set to leave Los Angeles for Honolulu with 200 people on board. In command was Captain Charles Hershey, a 59-year-old pilot flying his final trip before retirement after 32 years at Continental and 29,000 flight hours in the air. As the jet thundered down runway 6R at LAX, a single tire failure triggered one of the most frightening takeoff accidents in the airport's history. At 9:25 a.m., the recap tread of the number 2 tire on the left main landing gear peeled off mid-roll. The overload caused the number 1 tire to explode seconds later, sending shards of metal flying into a third tire, which also burst. Captain Hershey tried to abort the takeoff at just 4 knots, 4.6 miles per hour, below the critical V1 speed. But braking power was crippled. The DC-10 skidded off the wet runway, and 100 feet beyond, the left gear collapsed through soft pavement, rupturing a fuel tank. Flames erupted beneath the left wing as the aircraft slid 664 feet past the runway's end, engulfed in fire. Inside, chaos turned to heroism. As the flames intensified, all 4 right-side evacuation slides failed from heat damage. Passengers were forced to leap from the exits or escape through a rope lowered from the cockpit window. 4 people lost their lives, 29 others were seriously injured, and 10 firefighters suffered burns during the rescue. The $30 million jet was destroyed in minutes. Investigators later found the root cause: tire fatigue and overdeflection, made worse by mixing different tire models on the same axle. The disaster pushed the NTSB and FAA to overhaul aircraft tire standards, braking performance rules, and evacuation system designs, changes that continue to shape modern aviation safety nearly 5 decades later. Continental Airlines Flight 1943. On the morning of February 19, 1996, Continental Airlines Flight 1943, a McDonnell Douglas DC-932 built in 1970, was nearing the end of its flight from Washington, D.C. to Houston's Intercontinental Airport. The jet had logged over 63,000 flight hours and nearly 59,000 cycles, carrying 87 people on board. The flight had been smooth until the descent, when a single missed checklist item set off a chain of events that nearly ended in disaster. At 8:45 a.m., while descending through 19,000 feet, the first officer called for the in-range checklist. The captain went through 6 of the 7 steps, but skipped the crucial one: hydraulics. Without that check, the hydraulic system powering the landing gear and flaps wasn't pressurized. As the jet neared the runway at 9 a.m., the first officer tried to extend the flaps to 15 degrees, but nothing happened. Seconds later, the gear down command was given, followed by a loud thump, then the wailing gear warning horn. The captain dismissed the alarm as a false alert. Approaching runway 27 at 204 knots, with no landing gear and no flaps, the ground proximity warning system blared. Instead of aborting, the captain took control just 12 seconds before touchdown. At 193 knots, the DC-9 slammed belly first onto the runway, skidding 6,915 feet before stopping in a cloud of smoke 140 feet off the center line. Passengers scrambled out as the cabin filled with smoke, but miraculously, no one was killed or seriously injured. The NTSB later ruled the cause as pilot error, the captain's refusal to go around despite an unstable approach and repeated warnings. The oversight exposed deeper issues: Continental's lax procedural enforcement and the FAA's weak supervision. The aircraft, valued at several $1 million, was written off, a costly lesson in what skipping a single checklist can cost. Continental Micronesia Flight 614. On November 21, 1980, Continental Micronesia Flight 614, A Boeing 727-92C approached Yap Airport after departing Guam for a routine island hop flight. The aircraft, built in 1966 and logging over 30,878 flight hours, carried 73 people, and within minutes of landing, they'd be running for their lives. At 9:52 a.m., the captain, who hadn't flown a Boeing 727 in months, was performing a visual landing after circling low over the runway to check conditions. He'd even taken a few pictures of the airfield moments before touchdown, passing his camera to the flight engineer to capture a better angle. But that distraction proved costly. As the jet descended below a safe glide slope, the captain prematurely pulled back the thrust. The 727 slammed into rising terrain just 13 feet short of runway 07, causing the right main landing gear to shear off instantly. The crippled aircraft skidded 1,700 feet off the runway into thick jungle, where a massive fire erupted along the right wing. Within a minute, all 73 occupants had scrambled to safety, an incredible outcome considering the plane was fully engulfed in flames minutes later. The aircraft, valued at several $1 million, was completely destroyed. Investigators from the NTSB traced the cause to pilot error. The captain's DC-10 landing habits, involving shallower descent angles, didn't translate to the smaller, lighter 727. His lack of recent experience in the jet and a premature power reduction sealed its fate. The report, published 6 months later, urged airlines to better monitor pilot transitions between aircraft types. What could have been a catastrophic crash became a near-miracle evacuation, proof that even small lapses in precision at 300 feet can turn a routine landing into a fiery escape through the jungle.